All right, so we're diving into David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs. This one, I gotta admit, the title alone, it kind of grabs you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's more than just a funny title, right? He's really digging into this feeling so many of us have that our jobs, well, they lack meaning.
And how that resonates with people, it's fascinating. It's not just, oh, I hate my boss or whatever. It's deeper. Like this unease with the whole idea of work as we know it.
Yeah, totally. And Graeber, he doesn't beat around the bush. He just comes right out and identifies 5 types of these bullshit jobs. Get ready, because you're going to start seeing them everywhere. Seriously.
Oh, he really lays it out there. And he gives you such a clear picture of these roles. What really struck me was how this whole thing, it points to a shift. Like we used to value what you actually produce, the output, right? But now it's all about just busyness, just looking busy.
Okay, so let's break it down. First up, flunkies. I'm picturing like assistants to assistants. Their whole reason for existing is to make someone else feel important.
Right. All that forwarding emails, managing calendars for meetings they'll never attend.
Exactly. It's like, come on.
And Graeber tells this story about Steve, just out of college, eager to work, right? And his whole job was to tell his boss which emails were spam.
You gotta be kidding me.
Nope. Can you imagine? Talk about feeling totally superfluous. Just highlights how these roles, they don't actually contribute anything.
Demoralizing, even just hearing that. Okay, so flunkies, check. What's next on the bullshit job list?
Goons. And don't worry, it's not about literal goons, although some of them, their work does have kind of a negative impact. But the idea here is that these jobs, they only exist because other companies have them.
So it's like this arms race of uselessness, basically.
Pretty much. Graeber talks about corporate lawyers, for example, or those huge PR departments for universities that are already like ridiculously prestigious. Sure, their work might benefit their employer, but does it actually make the world a better place? That's the question he's posing.
All right, like, do we really need 12 people to convince us Harvard is a good school? I don't think so.
It's more about internal politics than actual impact.
Okay, so flunkies, goons. I'm starting to get a little nervous about where this is going.
Well, next up is duct tapers. And this one is super relatable, I think.
Oh, man. Tell me about it. We've all been there.
Right. These are the people brought in to fix problems that honestly shouldn't even exist. They're patching up these broken systems instead of anyone ever addressing the root cause.
Okay, yes. A million times yes. It's like constantly putting out fires.
Exactly. Graeber gives the example of a programmer who was hired to make this completely useless piece of software look functional just because some higher-ups had demanded it.
Oh, I've been there. It's maddening.
Right. It's like this endless cycle of fixing bugs in code that was poorly planned from the get-go.
And the worst part is, you know, if they just fixed the underlying problem, your job wouldn't even exist. It's self-defeating.
Okay. Ready for the next category? This one's a doozy.
Hit me.
Box tickers. This is all about proving you did the work, but not actually doing anything meaningful.
Oh, God, the paperwork.
Yes. All those pointless reports nobody reads, metrics that don't actually measure anything. It's just this illusion of productivity.
I'm getting flashbacks to performance review season. It's the worst.
In Graeber, he shares the story about Hannibal, this consultant who made a kill, like literally got rich by writing this completely pointless 2-page report that no one even used.
2 pages. And he got rich. Okay, something's broken here.
It's wild, right? But it shows you how much emphasis is placed on these, like, superficial markers of productivity, even if they're not actually achieving anything.
All right, so we've had flunkies, goons, duct tapers, box tickers.
Yeah.
There's one left, right? Please tell me it's not too soul-crushing.
Well, the last one is taskmasters. And this one hits a little different.
I'm bracing myself.
It's not just about doing pointless tasks yourself. It's about managing other people, creating this appearance of control, even if it hinders actual efficiency.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see where this is going. Those micromanagers we all know and don't love.
You got it. The supervisors who break down tasks into these absurdly simple steps, like you need a 3-page form to request a stapler.
Oof, the worst.
Exactly. Graeber argues that it's this illusion of control that's at the heart of so many of these roles.
So, to recap, we've got flunkies, goons, duct tapers, box tickers, and taskmasters. It's like he's giving us a whole new way to see the working world. It's a little terrifying, actually.
You know, it's not like somebody just woke up one morning and said, let's invent meaningless jobs. It's way more complicated than that, right? Graeber actually traces this whole thing back to this shift, like a change in how we even view work itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do you just change how we see work? Isn't work just Well, it's work, right? Like
Yeah.
we do.
Well, he argues that this whole concept of work that we have now, as this separate thing from the rest of our lives, you clock in, you clock out, you get your paycheck, that's actually a pretty recent invention. Think about it, for most of human history, work was just part of life.
Yeah, that makes sense. You farmed, you traded, you did what you had to do.
Exactly. There wasn't this hard line between work time and free time.
So when did things change? When did we get this whole bullshit jobs thing going on?
Well, Graeber points to a few key things. First up, the invention of the clock. And I know that sounds kind of basic, but think about it.
Okay, yeah, I'm listening.
Suddenly, you can standardize time, you can measure it really precisely, and you can divide it into these units you can sell.
Right. So instead of, hey, I'll pay you when this field is plowed, it's, I'll pay you for 8 hours of your time. Doesn't matter if you actually finish plowing the field, really.
Exactly. Time becomes a commodity, something you can buy and sell. Then you throw in the rise of industrial capitalism, the whole factory system, and that needed a different kind of worker.
Right. Someone who shows up at a certain time, does the same repetitive task over and over, gets told what to do.
Yep. Like Charlie Chaplin in modern times, just a cog in the machine.
And that model, even though most of us aren't working in factories anymore, it still kind of shapes how we think about work, doesn't it?
Totally. But wait, there's one more piece to the puzzle.
All right, lay it on me. This is getting good.
Protestantism. Specifically, Calvinism.
Oh, wow. Okay, I did not see that coming.
Remember the whole Protestant work ethic?
Yeah, hard work being not just, necessary, but morally good.
Yeah.
Like a sign you're right with God.
Exactly. So now you're not just working to survive, you're working to prove your worth. And even for people who weren't religious, this had a huge impact on how people saw work.
Okay, so it's like this perfect storm. Clocks, capitalism, a little bit of Calvinism, and bam, you've got the recipe for how we got here.
It's a heady mix, right?
It is.
Yeah.
But I got to ask, it still doesn't fully explain why we just accept these BS jobs.
Yeah.
And if people are so unhappy, why not just quit?
The million-dollar question. This is where Graeber gets really interesting, I think. He makes this connection between our childhood experiences and this whole adult world of work.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me more.
Think about those summer jobs we all had. Mowing lawns, flipping burgers, that kind of thing.
Ugh. Yeah, I spent a whole summer stuffing envelopes once.
Yeah.
Soul-crushing.
Exactly. It often felt more like an obligation than something you wanted to do, right?
100%.
And Graeber's point is that those kind of pointless jobs, they're like a training ground for the adult world of make work.
We're being conditioned from a young age.
It's the same dynamic.
Yeah.
You do it not because it's meaningful, but because it's what you're supposed to do.
So we're basically taught to accept a certain level of pointlessness in our work from the get-go.
That's kind of depressing.
Yeah, it's a bit bleak. But here's the thing. Recognizing this pattern, that's the first step to breaking free. And Graeber does have some potential solutions, ways to move forward. Okay, good. Because right now I'm feeling a little hopeless.
Don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. But before we get to those solutions, there's one more layer to this bullshit jobs thing we need to unpack. It's about those essential jobs, the ones that really matter, and why they're often the least valued in our society.
So we've got this whole historical setup for meaningless work, right? Like we're practically conditioned to just accept it. But there's got to be more to it than that. Why do we put up with a system where the jobs we consider the most essential, the ones that actually matter, why are those so often the least valued? It's kind of messed up when you think about it.
It's a huge contradiction.
Yeah.
And Graeber, he really highlights this tension. It's like the jobs we consider the most socially valuable, teachers, nurses, care workers, those are the ones that are often the least paid. It's wild.
It's like the system's got things totally backwards.
Yeah, exactly. And he argues that it all comes down to how we measure work. See, caring labor, the kind that actually makes people's lives better directly, well, that's hard to quantify.
Right, you can't exactly put a price tag on compassion or like the impact of a good teacher.
Exactly. But with those high-paying corporate jobs, the ones that are often focused on, generating profit, their impact is easier to measure. So they get more value in this system.
Even if they're not actually doing the most important work.
It's a system that prioritizes what's easiest to measure, not necessarily what's actually most valuable in a bigger sense, right?
It makes you think about those people we really admire, the ones we see as making a real difference in the world. Are they the high earners? Or are they the ones quietly doing the work, often with very little recognition or reward?
That's the question Graeber wants us to sit with. Like, what if we valued work differently? What if those caring professions, the ones that are actually making a difference in people's lives day to day, what if those were the most sought after jobs, the ones that were rewarded the most? It's a challenge to our priorities, for sure.
It really is. Okay, so we've explored this whole world of meaningless jobs, right? We've looked at the forces that created them, the ethical dilemmas, all of that. But is there any way out? Like, is there any hope?
Well, this is where Graeber throws a real curveball. His proposed solution, universal basic income.
UBI, I've heard that term, but to be honest, I'm not totally sure I understand how it works.
Okay, so imagine this. Everyone gets a guaranteed income, regardless of whether they have a job or not. No means testing, none of that. Just a set amount of money paid to every citizen to make sure they can meet their basic needs.
Wow. That's a pretty radical idea. How would that even work in practice?
Right. That's where it gets really interesting and where there's a lot of debate. There are actually lots of different models for how UBI could work. Some are more modest, some are way more radical. Some people see it as a way to streamline the existing welfare system, others as this huge shift in how we think about work and income altogether.
I bet there are a lot of people who are against it too.
Oh, absolutely.
I know.
Concerns about whether it's even economically feasible, what the social impacts might be. It's complex, for sure. But I think the really interesting thing about UBI, even if you don't agree with it, is that it forces us to have a bigger conversation about work itself. Like, what would you do with your time if you knew your basic needs were taken care of? What does the future of work look like?
That's a really powerful question to consider. What would you pursue if money wasn't the driving force? It makes you think.
Exactly. That's what I love about this book. It's not just complaining about bullshit jobs. It's about taking a hard look at our assumptions about what work is, why we do it, and what a more meaningful future could look like. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. It's a real deep dive into work, our culture, the whole system. But maybe, just maybe, it's also a glimpse into a future where finding work that's truly fulfilling, well, maybe that's not a luxury, but something everyone deserves. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's certainly given us a lot to think about.